Wow.
What's going on?
Well, I know you made reservations, but, I was thinking this could be kind of romantic.
I was wrong. I really needed you. That's why I wrote this song. You were working at the bar. I was walking over concrete stars. The piano took control of me, and that's when you took a hold of me. When I'm feeling far away.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode 197. Out now, on demand in the US and UK is Elephants, a charming and heartfelt romantic drama that takes us on a funny, sexy and moving journey through the ups and downs of a modern relationship. Joining me now to talk about the film is the film's writer and director, Alex Hanno. Alex, I thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Your film, Elephants, it's such a heartfelt story, such a funny story, which is something that really struck me because sometimes getting those two things working at the same time is a rare thing. I'm curious about the origins of this story. How did you come about telling us about this relationship between Lee and Kate?
So for us, it was, this really all stems from my relationship with actor and co-producer Luca Malacrino. We had worked on a number of projects before, and finally it came to a crossroads where we said, all right, we had done some short films together. We had done an independent pilot that did very well on the festival circuit, and we kind of said, all right, we are ready for the next step. And so we're starting to come up with ideas. What do we know? I always kind of hated that adage of write what you know, but when you're looking at an indie film and you really have that tight budget, for us that was really important. What do we know, and what could we do, with a budget that we knew we could raise? So, I'm a huge fan of romances in general. 500 Days of Summer, Before Sunsets. And so for me, it was kind of like, I know that can be manageable, and I know it well. And kind of my brand, what I always tend to pitch, because you, as a writer, you get the question, oh, well, what do you write? Do you write drama or do you write comedy? You get that, the first question you get as a writer. And I hate it because it really puts you in a box. And so for me, everything I do, I really try to blend comedy and drama, because I think especially now in this climate with the type of content we're dealing with, whether it's TV or film, that line is really blurred. You look at a show like Atlanta or a movie like The Big Sick. You can't really put either of those in a box of comedy or drama. And I think it's because audiences, they want something authentic. You can wake up and have the worst morning of your life, but by the end of the day, maybe it's the best day of your life, right? Because something happens and in the middle of the day, and it turns out to be fantastic. So for me, I've always wanted to try to capture that authenticity. And so for this, it was like, okay, we want to do a romance, and I don't want it to be cheesy. I don't want it to be a rom-com, and I don't want it to be sappy and some sort of love story that's just a complete bore, so to speak. I really wanted to find that authenticity, that mix of the pair. So, but with all of that, we kind of said, all right, we know tonally where we want this film to lie, and we got to work on it. And really what I did, I knew some of the actors I wanted to work with. I'd worked with them on numerous different projects. Luca among them, Alison Blaze, who plays his co-star, Kate Caldwell, and then Lauren Kelly, who plays a supporting character in the role as well. I'd worked with all of them before, and so I knew going into it that I was going to be writing these characters around them. And really what I did is I interviewed each person, and I tried to pull out as much of their individual histories, specifically with relationships, as I could. Because obviously, again, we're trying to talk about authenticity. I wanted to be able to pull from their past experiences. So these characters are not per se based on them by any means, but some of the backstory, some of the nuance, some of the inspiration is from their own lives. And so with all of that, we started coming up with a story and putting that together, and it kind of blossomed from there. We knew, obviously, if you watch Elephants, it's largely takes place in one location. It's in a house that belongs to Kate Caldwell's character. And so we knew, okay, how do we build that into the script, for example? How do we, again, thinking about indie budgets, how do we make a world out of a single house? And that's part of where Lee's backstory of sort of his criminal history and his fear of going out into society really played into the world of this story. This is his world. This is where he feels safe and comfortable. And so we kind of tried to build a setting out of just one location, truly. So,
when it comes to getting that authenticity working on screen, I found what really worked with your film is the chemistry between Luca and Alison. You have worked with them before. I'm not sure if necessarily they have actually worked together on screen before. When it comes to getting that chemistry to work, for that pop to happen, what do you rely on? Do you rely on knowing the personalities of your actors? Do you do rehearsal? How does that work? Is this something that comes across much more organically as opposed to being resourceful in regards to doing the indie production?
Yeah, I mean, in this specific instance, Alison and Luca have a lot of backstory. They actually went to school together at AMDA in Los Angeles. And they had been they'd been in a stage show together. They had been in one of my short films together. They were both in the pilot that I had made. So we really had tracked their trajectory and their on-screen chemistry for a number of years before this film. So they had all of that going into Elephants, rather. But having said that, when you get into the film and you're dealing with these two characters who are not at all like Alison or Luca, it really is a testament to both of them as actors. I mean, we had done rehearsals, but again, indie budget, you don't have time to really work through the project as much as you might want to in advance. So it really was a testament to them. And again, I didn't, I did as much directing as I could in the scenes, but a lot of it it came naturally. And they, I will say, they both worked on their characters independently for probably a month or two before we ever started rolling, just really getting into character, really asking the right questions and kind of studying what make these two people tick. And I think really what they depended on was, like I said before, really going back into their own relationships, and specifically perhaps those relationships that weren't all that healthy. Because I think, almost anybody can relate to that. Almost anybody has been there and had a relationship that maybe didn't work out the right way or had its fair share of bumps along the way. And that's what Elephants is all about. It's about a pair who love each other so much, but maybe just aren't right for each other. And so I think they depended on that. And most of the time what I would do, because again, I had interviewed both of them, I know them very intimately, and I know the kind of some of their past relationships, I oftentimes would sort of delve into that on set to try to get them to the moment that might be needed. Whether it was one of the big fight moments or whether it was one of the more intimate moments. I think their history and knowing each other so well made it a lot easier to have some of those sexier or more intimate scenes because they felt very comfortable and safe knowing that they were, working alongside somebody who's really professional and somebody who cares about them as more than just a coworker, so to speak. But so it's, I would definitely say it's a testament to them as actors to be able to kind of delve into that. But it's wild because truly they have, in real life they're very good friends, but they have no chemistry. They've never had any sort of relationship ever. But seeing them delve into those characters, by the end of that shoot, there was this real spark. And that was pretty special as a director to see how deep they got into these two roles, that they managed to find that spark. Obviously after the fact it was back to just being regular old friends and such, but they really had that moment of, oh wow, we feel this. So yeah.
Interesting thing about the love story between these two characters of Lee and Kate is that it almost seems like a relationship that's stuck in time. To go further into the plot, Lee just came out of prison, did 3 years. I think from what I can gather from the info, it seemed to be an assault charge of some kind. He's such a hothead character, something happened there. And he comes out and they try to rekindle the relationship. But this was 3 years. This was a relationship that ended 3 years ago. The world has moved on. Kate definitely has tried to move on. That element in itself, that thing where this couple has to grow and change to catch up with the world around them, is such an interesting kind of element to work on. Can you talk to me a little bit about that, especially in regards to Lee, the character of Lee, and his stubbornness to change, where Kate has kind of moved on without him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, I'm a huge fan of Richard Linklater, and specifically of Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, Before Midnight. And when we went into this, I knew right away. Okay, I to some extent want to take inspiration from that. And I look at this in a weird way as sort of our Before Sunset, the middle of this trilogy, and we really built out this backstory of a first movie that never was, a first movie that never got shot, in their original relationship and all the volatile, explosive nature of that relationship 3 years prior, as you mentioned. And we felt it probably was a more interesting story to delve into the middle of it. And so, yeah, I guess for us, just giving Kate that opportunity to have grown and have her character be this woman who wants to kind of get away from that past, get away from the toxicity of what once was, meeting this unstoppable force of this man who, because he's kind of, as you said, been trapped in time in prison and hasn't had that ability to grow or change, and in many ways probably has done the opposite, right? Because especially if you are locked away for a crime like that, you're gonna have to grow in completely different ways. You're gonna have to sort of put a wall around yourself to make it through prison. And he is a hot-headed character, but I don't think we really tried to make him a soft at heart, despite his tendencies to lash out. So I think for him, prison was not a place that he was ever meant to be or felt completely comfortable being in, obviously. So that's where we really wanted to get these two. Right at the beginning was immense conflict, basically saying, okay, Kate has she's grown into this person who doesn't want to be dragged down, wants to get free of her vices, of her addictions, of her past, and in so many ways to shed all of that. And having Lee in there with, like I said, just that immense love between them, that's the one thing that kind of ties it together. So just starting them out with that conflict right at the bat. And then it is this weird trajectory where, because Lee loves Kate, he tries to grow over the course of this film. And I think Kate kind of recesses or falls into a lot of her old habits because she loves Lee. And it's this idea of like they're both changing or trying to change to match what they think the other wants or what they think the other needs. And they're just never quite parallel, never quite running in stride. And again, I think any good love story is always going to have their two central leads in some sort of conflict, because otherwise, what do you have? You just have you're watching two people sit on a couch and binge Netflix. Yeah. And so for us, it was just always trying to figure out, okay, well, how can we constantly have these two at odds with each other? Because again, they do want the best for each other, and hopefully at the end of the film, which I won't completely spoil, but hopefully we see that to some extent they've grown to understand that. And obviously love is tough, and that's the whole crux of this, is that it's so hard to leave something that you genuinely love and that feels so good in the moment, but taking a step back from it doesn't make you a better person per se. It doesn't make you grow. So yeah, I think having Lee have gone to jail, having Kate grow into this tough, independent woman without him, were really that's just the setup for the conflict of the whole thing.
The thing about this relationship between these characters is it can be a volatile relationship. It can also be a very physical relationship. And Alex, I'm going to ask you a question that in all these podcasts I've done, I've never had a chance to ask a filmmaker yet. And I figure, why not break that drought and ask you first? When it comes to filming sex scenes, how did you guys go on about doing it on your production? Is this something that was marked as a dreaded date on the calendar as the days gone by, people getting nervous as it was coming up, or did you, as the film's director, make sure that this was going to be as comfortable experience as possible? You touched on it briefly in regards to the how both Luca and Alison knew each other, so there was already a kind of familiarity there. But when it comes to actually getting it done, how do you go about doing the sex scene, shooting it, and making sure that it all comes out fine? And I'm sure there's going to be awkward moments as well. How does it all happen?
Yeah, I think, it's really two things. It's first and foremost, you are protecting your actors. That is the number one. I think for any director, they're going to answer that because it's true. You have to protect your actors because they're the ones who are really putting themselves out there and who are, literally and figuratively, they're exposing themselves. And, there can be a lot of, I think, negative repercussions from that. But going into this film, I knew very specifically, and I always had this vision from the outset, that this couple is, as you said, they're very physical, especially for a man who just got out of prison, who is a testosterone-filled human being. Once you see his character, he's a tough guy, he's a hothead. The first thing he's going to want to do is make love with this woman that he's been thinking about for 3 years. So we couldn't avoid that physicality. There was no way to in my opinion, without having that element, because I think, again, that's authentic. And the same for Kate. She's been in a relationship with somebody else in the movie for, who knows exactly how long, let's say a year, but you can tell that she's missing something. She doesn't have that spark. So when Lee comes back, it's, she has that same sort of feeling. So we knew that we needed that physicality. And my vision for it, I'm not one to just throw somebody on a screen and have them nude for the sake of trying to get, a couple extra eyes on my project. It's just, I don't think it's tasteful. So it had to serve the story. That was the fundamental thing. It had to serve the story. It had to tell something about these characters. And I think there are specifically, I would say, really 3 different sort of main sex scenes in the film. And so for each one, it was a conversation with the actors to say, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. This is why we're doing it. Does anybody have any problems with this, any questions about how it's going to be done, and really making sure that we walked, myself and my cinematographer walked our actors through beforehand to let them know exactly, how we're doing this, why we're doing this, etc. So, for example, there's a scene where, kind of one of the more serious sex scenes, where they're both lying in bed and they're covered in paint from this previous scene, and, Luca had a lot of questions about that because I think in his brain he thought it was going to be a bit gratuitous, and we don't actually expose. I think we expose his behind here, but we don't expose anything else. And I really wanted to make sure that he knew, okay, this is about us exploring you as a couple, as sort of as one, almost as a pair for the very first time. And so it wasn't about just trying to show some part of them nude on screen. It was really about taking that camera and traveling along this form that's really intermingled. It's almost impossible to tell where one stops and where the other begins. So really, again, trying to tell something with the camera, trying to tell something with this moment. And I think at the end of it, I think the actors were really grateful that it wasn't just us showing them in the heat of the moment just so that we could show a pair of breasts on screen. It was really about, okay, what does this tell us about them? It tells us that for the very first time, they feel comfortable with each other. They're making love. They're not having sex. And so that was, again, just making sure everyone was comfortable. And, it is awkward for sure. You've got, myself, our cinematographer, and the sound guy, because it was a closed set otherwise, stuck in a little room with this pair who were pretty much, bare naked at that point. But I think that goes back to what you mentioned before about them being very comfortable with each other. And then also comfortable with the rest of us. We didn't shoot that day one. We shot that on the 12th day of filming. So, by that point, everyone had grown as a family. Almost everyone had already worked together on different projects independently as well. So for us, we already had that sort of connectivity of, okay, we know that this is important and this is, you're really putting yourself on the line here, and we respect that. We want to kind of do as much to protect you as possible. And then in some of the other scenes before that, there's a bit more humor to them. And I think that was the trick there. It was kind of trying to find the fun in this and let them know, hey, again, we're not doing this to because we're trying to get that type of viewer on this film. It's not, this is not a softcore porno. It's a romantic dramedy. Yep. So trying to have, find the light of it. And there were plenty of moments to laugh. I can tell you right now, like, there's a scene where they're in the kitchen, and this is the first moment where Lee gets an opportunity to really start, making out with Kate, and it gets a little hot and heavy after that. And that, going back to what I said earlier, was really about he's been locked away for 3 years. He really hasn't touched a woman in 3 years. What is the first thing he's going to do, especially with the woman that he loves? Well, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be animalistic. It's going to be hot. It's going to be passionate. But, in filming that, I can remember Allison just moving just in the wrong direction, and her armpit just makes this fart sound, and everyone breaks out laughing in the middle of it. And that's the key there. It's just to have fun with it and make sure everyone feels safe and know at the end of the day, this is a film. This is not, you're performing, but it's okay to fail. It's okay to make a mistake. It's not even their fault. It's okay to be a little silly with it. And I think that was kind of what got us through those other moments, and especially there's a montage where I think there's 4 or 5 different cuts of them having sex in these crazy different positions. And that was, again, like, let's have fun with this. Let's not take ourselves too seriously. Still a closed set. We ended up shooting that, I think, maybe that was the 13th day of filming. But yeah, just really making sure that everyone knows exactly why we're filming each scene, and not just throwing it in for the sake of it. So,
a name you have referenced through our conversation is Richard Linklater, especially in regards to his before films. What's special about his films, of course, is that there were a collection of them that took snapshots in the evolution of the couple that was played on screen by Ethan Hawke and Julianne. Sorry, I forgot the actress' name. I'll take Julianne Delpy. Thank you very much. When it comes to depicting the relationship between Lee and Kate, do you think there's a possibility maybe there could be future films in regards to showing their evolution? Could you perhaps maybe show a prequel that showed what happened 3 years prior? Could you show a film that's going to happen 3 years in the future? I mean, is there a possibility for this to happen, or is this going to be the last time we're going to see Lee and Kate on screen?
Yeah, so, I think going into this, I'm very much of the mindset, make a good movie. And then what will happen from there will happen. I mean, I'm a huge Marvel movie fan, for example, and I think what they figured out very early was these movies have to be good independently if you want to build any sort of story from there. Yep. So going into Elephants, that was my number one goal. Make this good, and don't even think about anything after. But of course, when you get to that last scene, and it's very intentionally, we leave it a bit ambiguous, so that it's sort of a litmus test for the viewer to see what they believe and see how they feel about love, especially after watching an hour and a half of a roller coaster of a movie. You can't help but wonder what's going to happen next, and that's what I did. As soon as I finished writing, I was like, okay, I like this. I think this is going to work really well. But yeah, I do want to know what happens next. So I do have ideas for where I would want to take this couple, in the future. I think similar to that Before trilogy, I wouldn't want to pick this up for a number of years because, again, now that I know kind of in my head where their story goes from here, I think it, without saying too much, I think it makes sense that we have some time apart and away from Lee and Kate to let them grow. Very similarly to how, there was that 3-year gap in their relationship between when it sort of ended because Lee had to go away and when we pick it back up at the beginning of Elephants. I don't ever really want to revisit their initial relationship on screen because I feel like we kind of tell that story already in Elephants, and to retread that ground I think would be a bit unnecessary. But as far as the future goes, I absolutely want to pick it back up. And yeah, I mean, again, it's just, I think a lot of people can relate to the idea that there's always that question of what if. There's always that person that you're wondering, okay, well, where are we going to go? Or am I going to bump into them 7 years down the line and still have that spark? I mean, that's essentially what Before Sunset is all about. These people meeting after, I think it's 9 years in that movie, and haven't seen each other since. And the whole movie is just them trying to fight the urge to kiss, fight the urge to tell each other that they haven't stopped thinking about each other since Vienna. And so for us, with whatever this next story could be, I think it's that spark is 100% going to be there for Kate and Lee to explore. Down the road and to see where their kind of story goes. Whether it'll happen, who's to say? I think it's only time will tell, and I think there's a lot that can happen in 5 to 7 years or however long in my head it's sort of planned out. But yeah, I would absolutely love to revisit it.
Well, I absolutely hope that it does, because I love Elephants. I think it's a great film, and yourself and your cast have done such a great job with this story. Like I mentioned to you off the air prior to our discussion, I get sent a lot of movies, and when that one hits, it's such a great feeling to watch a film like that. So for everyone out there, especially my listeners in the US and the UK, Elephants available now on demand. I suggest you watch it. It's such a fun, romantic, sexy journey through the evolution of this couple, played so well on the screen by Luca Malacrino and Alison Blaise, two actors who I think have such a bright future ahead of them, two very charming actors there, did a great work. And Alexander, you've done great work here as well. Thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast, and hopefully when that future story does come about, we can talk once again about this couple and about your movies.
Absolutely. Well, again, I so appreciate your time and all the fantastic questions. And yeah, I look forward to that day.